This is Robbie Herrera, and you're listening to the Fulham Focus podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Fulham Focus podcast. My name's Matt Boisclair, and I hope you've all got over last weekend's latest shit show, as I'm afraid we've got to do it all again on Monday afternoon in what some might call a relegation six-pointer against Slaven Bilic's West Bromwich Albion, if the lofty heights of getting 6 points this season felt at all realistic at this point. We're here to try and find some positives, though, as we look ahead to the game. The clocks have gone back, the nights have drawn in, and the temperature's dropping. And just when you think that things can't get any worse, I deliver the news to you that Baldo's on the show for the second time this week. He's joined by the man with the stats, Moncton FC's number one, Matt Statto. Plus, Morgs will be with me in a little while for an in-focus chat about the Fulham career of Super Geoff Horsfield. So let's get right on with it.
Fulham.
Well, lads, last season it was very much a case of after you, when it came to who was going to get the points to secure automatic promotion. Brentford choked at the key moment when it was in their hands away at Stoke. Fulham never tried to win the game at the Hawthorns that would really have laid down our intent to win automatic promotion. And in the end, on the last day of the season, neither Fulham, Brentford or West Brom won, which meant West Brom scraped over the line, which was a complete damp squib. Both sides are still yet to win this season, although West Brom have got 3 points from their 6 games so far compared to our 1 draw from the same amount of games. Statto, who's improved their side more since we met last in July, Fulham or West Brom?
That's quite an interesting question, actually. If you look at us, well, on paper, if you look at it, you could say that we've improved our squad most. We've signed 10 players, 10 good players, compared to West Brom, who they didn't really make that many improvements at all. Most of the signings that they made were just the loan signings that they had last season, then turned them into permanents. And then they added a few extra signings here and there, like Karlan Grant, Ivanovic. But, it's we're both in the same position. So, it's kind of hard to say who actually has improved the most. Some could say that West Brom were doing what we should have done, in that keeping faith in the team that got us up and going with that. But as that's showing, it's not really any improvement on what we've done so far. So it's a weird one.
We did try that, though, didn't we, against Arsenal on the opening day, and that went well.
Yeah, well, it was well for the first 5 minutes or so. It was a good 5 minutes. That's the last time I felt happy as a Fulham fan, I think.
Best 5 minutes of the season.
Definitely. And obviously, that's Arsenal. It's a top 6 team. It's kind of hard to judge that throughout a whole season. Giving them just one game was a bit harsh in the grand scheme of things. But hey, that's where we are now. So it is what it is.
All right, mate. And how about you, Baldo? Who's improved their side more, West Brom or Fulham?
I think it's us, although it's one of these on paper we've improved more than them, because it certainly as hell isn't showing anything based on what we've seen the first couple of weeks. Touching on what Matt Ard said, most of the deals were turning their permanents or turning their loan deals into permanents, the likes of Callum Robinson and Grady Dean Garner as well. Getting Karlan Grant, I think, was a very smart move, but over the course of it, I think we probably did just about enough. As it's minimal. It's like we got a 7.1 in the transfer window and they got a 7 out of 10 sort of thing. It's very marginal, but I think I'd give it to us just. I think the fact that they signed David Button just shows you how bad a window they had, though.
Oh, God, yeah, I forgot about that. Well, arguably neither of these two squads are sufficient for Premier League survival. How can we be the best of the worst on Monday night? And Statto, what team would you pick to deliver our first 3 points of the season?
To be the best of the worst. It's dire that we're already here at this position 7 games in. But hey, I think team-wise, I think Scott needs to look back at the game that we played well in, which is the Sheffield United game. What works well there, that we had the midfield 3 of Kearney, Anguissa and Loftus-Cheek. Go back to that. Don't play Loftus-Cheek out wide on the right, and don't restrict Frank by playing him in this weird defensive midfield position. Go back to that midfield 3 that worked so well. Keep the same back 4. Consistency is key here, because looking at the face of it, in 6 games, we've played 5 different defensive combinations, 6 different midfield combinations, and 6 different attacking combinations. There's no consistency. There's no, how are we going to get results if it's just a different team each week? So stick with the same defense that we had for the last 2 weeks now. Attack-wise, you have Mitro, you have Lookman, they're givens, they're the starters. And then it's that right mid spot, which is kind of that weak position that we have at the moment. Obviously, Cavallero had an awful game the other week. Whether he's still injured, we don't know. Kamara's on a red card, for better or worse. So that kind of leaves 2 options, in my opinion. That's either Cabano or Bobby De Cordova-Reid. Again, Cabano didn't make the bench last week, so I don't know if he's injured or not. He could be fit, who knows? And if that is the case, then it's going to have to be Reid, I think. And people may not like him. He may be a championship player at best, but he's the best we've got in that position at the moment, I think.
Yeah, okay. I'm with you in that I really think that we should be playing our best players in their best positions. Anguissa sitting in front of the defence, almost box to box, Lookman on the left, instead of just shoehorning these players in. And even Kearney, when he played against Sheffield United, looked good in front of the back four as well. So again, keep him there and stop messing around with it, stop tinkering. And I think I mentioned a couple of shows ago that it almost seems like Scott Parker's got a different game plan, a different formation, and a different team planned for each opposition that we face. And it's just not working. It's clearly not working because we haven't won yet this season. So I agree with you that consistency is key. One thing that I was going to ask you, you mentioned about Kamara and the red card there. And we saw the incident that led to his red card against Crystal Palace at the weekend. And then there was the incident that led to Digne being sent off for Everton away at Southampton. And that got a lot of national press. But for me, the incidents weren't that dissimilar. Yeah, Digne appealed and got his ban reduced to 1 game, which means that he'll play against us in a few weeks' time. For Everton, and we haven't even bothered appealing. I don't know whether that's tactical and just an excuse to leave Kamara out, or it just seems bizarre that it seems one rule for one and one rule for another in this instance to me. What do you think, Statto?
I'll be honest, I don't really care. And what I mean by that is Digne is a key player for Everton. He's their main left back. He produces many assists and goals. Kamara, I don't really care if he plays or not. He's not really that good. He doesn't provide much to the team, whether it's him playing or Cavallero or Cabano. It makes no real difference. He's not a huge loss. So, meh. Like, if we have him, we have him. If we don't, then it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion.
Fair enough. All right, Baldo, I'm going to come across to you then and get your lineup suggestion, let's call it, for Monday night.
I don't really think it's a lineup suggestion, touching on what Statto said earlier. I think what we need more than anything is a mentality change. Because whilst you say that, all the different systems and personnel haven't working, I think it's the way we play is the thing that isn't working. And at this stage, do we really have anything to lose at this stage? We just need to be far more attacking more than anything. Enough of the... I know we've been saying this for ages with Scott Parker, but enough of the passing the ball around and all that sort of stuff. And let's just go. Let's just attack teams. We may lose some games, but the chances are we're going to win some games as well. If you go back to the West Brom game, after lockdown, the reason we didn't get a win that day was because we just sat back and let the draw play out, which at the end cost us automatic promotion. We got there in the end, but it was a bit of a downturn. So I agree with what Statto said in terms of lineup and personnel and everything. But I just think it needs to be more of a attacking mentality. That's what we need right now, rather than trying to tinker and change anything. Get a settled side, but let's go for it a little bit more.
I agree with that, and I Frenchy, you made a really good point earlier about how we react to what other teams do. So what we need to be doing, we need to be reacting. No, we don't need to be reacting to what other teams do. We need to be having our own game plan. We need to be playing in a certain way. We need to be attacking more enthusiastically. And if that doesn't work, if the team isn't playing better than us, then yes, we then react to that. But approaching games by kind of trying to combat what other teams are doing, it's not working. And chopping and changing is a part of that, and that needs to change. And like you said, Baldo, we need to have that mentality of approaching games that we're going to win and we're going to go ahead and attack.
Yeah, it's one of these phrases in. I know it's American sports. I don't know if it's quite made it over there. It's being proactive rather than being reactive. You know,
Exactly.
I know. Frenchie says that we set up with a different game plan for every team that we play. That's probably fine if you are, you know, a quote unquote bigger team in the league, and you know you're going to win. Like Man City can tinker their game plan from when they play Arsenal to when they play Burnley. But for us, the underdogs in was probably going to be most games this season. I don't think it quite works for us. We need to have that settled mentality and hope they get us through. You know, go back to Blackpool when they went down with, I think they had something like 40. It was more than 40 points when they went down in 2011. But
no, it wasn't quite, was it? But I remember it was the final day against United that they just about went down.
Yeah, but the fact they lasted that long but the way they played was just attacking every week. And Holloway said, we're going to lose some games, but at least we're going to go down, you know, fighting. And, you know, arguably one of the better teams that ever went down was that team. So hopefully we stay up. But that's the sort of thing I'm going on about.
I think that's probably the main difference between us and West Brom at the moment. West Brom have kind of approached the Premier League by sticking to what they played last season in the Championship. You know, they've still got the same players, they still play roughly the same system. And although they've only got 2 points more, something great, they're still getting good draws against Chelsea, against Burnley. They've got a good draw against Brighton on Monday. And that's just by playing their game rather than trying to combat the opposition. And that's kind of the main difference between us and them at the moment.
All right, well, there'll be more of this after this In Focus chat I had with Morgs recently about Fulham legend and ex-West Bromwich Albion striker Geoff Horsfield.
Fulham.
Right, yes, it's the latest in our player focus chats this week. It's Geoff Horsfield. I've got Morgs with me. Morgs, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm also well. Very well, thanks. Let's get into it then. So, back in the days when there weren't proper transfer windows, Kevin Keegan stole swashbuckling centre-forward and former Hoddy, Super Geoff Horsfield from Halifax Town, where he'd scored 46 goals in 74 games. And we paid a bargain, £350,000 for him. And he took to playing in Division 2 like a duck to water. What do you remember about that time and the signing of Geoff in particular?
Well, obviously, that particular season, I mean, that's probably, for those that remember, it's probably one of the, you know, alongside the Mickey Adams season 2 years before, it's one of our favourite seasons. Those, you know, 3 out of 5 seasons going up to the Premier League were some of the most enjoyable football that fans can remember. I remember when we were being linked to Horsfield, it was quite weird because he was so unglamorous compared to so many of the other signings that we were bringing on board at the time. And so I think, you know, certainly I thought it was like, oh, okay, so we're buying him, you know, would it be a squad player? You know, he got, you know, a good rep from, you know, playing at Halifax. And obviously this was in the time pre-YouTube, so I couldn't just look him up and see what his goals were like. But then he came onto the scene, and you said, like, he was a duck to water, which is quite appropriate for his first game, I guess.
Yeah, that absolutely soaking wet game against Walsall. He took just 11 minutes to score his first goal for the club in that match. And I'd forgotten, actually, Walsall actually finished second that season behind us, although quite some way behind us. But yeah, he came off the bench. We're already 3-1 up, and he scored. What do you remember about the goal, apart from being soaking wet?
Well, yeah, I was. I remember I've been in the first half. I've been sitting in the Riverside stand where I was sitting at the time, and what was it? I must have been 13, 14, I guess, and just going into the hammy end for the second half, and it just absolutely teeming down. And I remember him getting the ball near the halfway line, or I assume it was near the halfway line, and him just weaving his way through, like the original Ronaldo. You know, he seemed so nimble for someone so, I think chunky's harsh, but he was a big lad, and him just smashing in the goal. It was like, okay, this is a serious player. We've got him for a bargain compared to a lot of our signings, and be interesting to see what he does from now.
What you've got to remember about him is that he was a part-time footballer before he signed for us. He was a builder whilst playing for Halifax, and he was built like a builder.
Yeah,
and for he did it
strong.
Yeah, he did have finesse about him, but defenders just bounced off him. And where defenders didn't bounce off him, he made sure they bounced off him. And you're right, he went through the defenders, the Walsall defenders, like they weren't there. And the finish was superb as well. It was just a little dink over the keeper into the bottom corner.
Yeah, and it was everything about that seemed odd because he came into the pitch and you see him not lumbering on because he was quite, quick in his own way, but the way he worked his way, his determination. You could clearly see he was up for it. He'd made this big transfer, but he also wasn't fazed by it because he's a northern lad from Halifax, and he wasn't. He would just got on with the job, and nothing was going to stop him from scoring. And ran through that defence, and then a nice, cheeky, delicate chip of a finish. It was like that was so, unreflective of what he looked like.
Yeah, when he started scoring, he really did hit a purple patch. He was quickly nicknamed the Horse, which is quite an obvious nickname. But everything he touched just seemed to fly into the back of the net, prompting the chant, "Who the fuck is Alan Shearer?" And the horse goes marching on. Then when it became clear that Kevin Keegan was going to leave at the end of the season to manage the England team, Horsfield for England took over. He was a prolific striker that I'd not seen the like of before at Fulham in my years, certainly not. That 1998-99 Division 2 title-winning side was fantastic, but after he got himself into the team, he was absolutely unplayable, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I kind of, you do wonder. I mean, the fact is, anyone who went into that team, unless you're not, Eddie Johnson or something like that, you were going to score goals in that team because we were such an attacking side. And Keegan teams didn't play for that 1-0 win. They played for that 5-4 win. And so anyone who was, any striker who was fortunate enough to play in a Keegan side was bound to get goals if, they were efficient enough. And he was. And I remember obviously going into the sort of that last game against Preston. And it was such a weird atmosphere because we had absolutely stormed that league. And I can't remember if he was playing or not because obviously Moody got his hat-trick in it. But
Moody came on at half-time.
Yeah, and he obviously the Horsfield for England chants was sort of going on still. But it was more the fact that we actually believed that he was going to get an England cap. Because obviously this was pre-Twitter and everything like that. But the rumours were, and I think obviously, some of the press had picked up on whether he could actually get an England cap because of Keegan and the fact that he was banging them in. But unfortunately, it never quite sort of panned out like that. But he certainly earned his stripes in Division 2, that quickly.
He did. And you think about the way we used to play, you talk about the Kevin Keegan philosophy of winning the game 5-4 rather than 1-0, and it was attacking football at its best and entertainment as well. We did play a 5-man defence, but it was very much with Steve Finnan and Rufus Brevitt as those attacking wing-backs. And then the three across the back were either Kit Simons, Chris Coleman and Simon Morgan, or later that season, Philippe Albert as well, who joined on loan.
That's a different story, but I love that guy.
Yeah, it was an incredible team. It really was. But Geoff Horsfield was, not necessarily the biggest name in the side or the most glamorous of footballers, but he was super effective at that level.
But do we think, perhaps that actually worked in our favour because we had so many Division 2 players that having a player who was a little bit more rough and ready actually played to our strengths because it allowed, we had this glamorous team, but having someone of, Jeff's style were actually allowed us to sort of, compete with some of these teams who were, a bit just old school, for want of a better term.
Well, he was up front with Barry Hales as well for a lot of the time, wasn't he? And Barry Hales, once he'd hit his form, he was excellent as well. And we'll do a Barry Hales in focus, I'm sure, at some point. But he took a little bit of time to hit his form and find his feet. But they were two very different players because Barry Hales was very quick, but also very strong. But they complemented each other as well, and there was so many goals between the two of them. It was unreal. Plus, then we had Pesh as well, who was playing second fiddle to the pair of them, but also had plenty of goals in him as well.
And you've said, obviously Moody, I think, had been injured or wasn't playing much in that season towards the end. But for a front line, that front four, obviously back in the days when you play two up front, I mean, that is pretty special. I mean, on the face of it, you look at it and go, what is that? But back then, it was brilliant to watch. You knew that there were constantly going to be goals. And obviously, much like in the Tigana season, when we had, that great front line, they were always, we knew we weren't going to be getting 0-0 draws under Keegan. Obviously, Bracewell was a different story.
Well, we'll come on to the Paul Bracewell season then. Our first in Division 1, the current championship, having been promoted with Kevin Keegan as manager, wasn't the most exciting. However, the victory against Spurs in the League Cup, when we beat them 3-1 in the Worthington Cup, or the League Cup as you want to call it, that really stands out. Geoff scored an absolute belter that day and made Sol Campbell, who at the time was one of the best defenders in the country, look very average in the way that he bullied him.
Yeah, and this is the one goal that, he'll be remembered for a lot of goals, but I think that particular night, it was something particularly special. He showed that, given the chance, he could have been Premiership quality, as it was then. And it was, I think, that atmosphere that night was one of the more special ones. Pre kind of Europa League era and all that sort of stuff. There was there was so much of a buzz going round. And even though the season up to then, or wasn't as exciting as before, it was taking on the Worthington Cup holders for a start, and making them look bang average. And it was, I just remember that night. I being the good middle class boy that I was, came from boarding school, got special dispensation to leave, and made it just in time for the game. And it was just the whole evening was just it was incredible. And I think that goal really summed up how dominant we were in that game.
We had a habit of knocking out Premier League or Premiership teams back then as well. We'd knocked out Southampton out the League Cup. We'd knocked them out the FA Cup as well. Maybe that was the previous season.
That was the previous season, wasn't it?
Yeah, Wimbledon as well. Aston Villa the previous season. So we did claim some Premiership scalps at the time, but Spurs was a big one just because they were the Worthington Cup holders, as you say. And it was back in the days as well when people actually gave a little bit of a shit about the League Cup as well, I think.
Yeah, and, if you had Championship versus Premier League Cup games at the moment, no one would give a shit. No. It's fallen by the wayside. And I think, that was kind of the 90s for you really as well. Mm. There was still the romance in the game, which, let's not sort of get political or anything like that, but I mean, it's lost someone recently. And it's slightly different if you're, Division 3 or, League 2, League 1 side playing a Premier League team in the FA Cup maybe, but even then, that seemed like a special game. And I think, the fact it was a London derby, the fact we hadn't played them for however long, actually, we played them season 4, didn't we? And we lost 3-1 in the FA Cup. But then sort of getting our revenge in that, I guess that sort of added to the occasion as well. But I think just all round back then, having the chance to beat and then doing it so dominantly, just, obviously gave Geoff, a big boost as well. And, I think just generally for a football team who were surging up the leagues, it was a great time.
Would you say that was your favourite Geoff Horsfield goal then? The Spurs
I would say it was my favourite Geoff Horsfield goal. He scored so many good goals during his time at Fulham, and it was either that or his first goal, because his first goal was so good as well. But he scored so many with like little dinks with the outside of his foot. You kind of, we've spoken about this before, but there weren't that many with his head. Yet there were so many little, delicate little finishes. And I think the one against Spurs, just for me, because of the evening, because of the game and how well we played it aside, and that kind of just was the icing on the cake for that one. And so I think, that would definitely go down as my favourite Geoff goal.
Yeah, he bent his run, didn't he, to stay on side, and then just, as you say, finish with the outside of his boot. It was a cracking finish. I think for me, I've always enjoyed going to Luton, and he scored a couple of goals.
You're the first person to ever say that.
Well, I've been to Kenilworth Road 3 times. I didn't go on Boxing Day last season, but I went 3 times in the late 90s, and I saw Fulham win 4-1, 4-0, and 3-0. And it might have been the 4-1 game when Geoff got a brace. And it was at a time where literally every shot that he had just flew into the back of the net. His first goal, he's kind of just barged his way through a couple of defenders, cut back inside another one, and just really quickly stuck it right in the bottom corner. And then the next one was quite different. It came at him quite quickly, and he's guided it into the top corner. And there was all sorts going on that night. I remember Lenny Lawrence was managing Luton. And we were singing Horsfield for England. Then we were singing Lawrence for Chelsea because we were beating them 4-1. It was just a really good night. And I also remember, have you ever been to Kenilworth Road?
No, I haven't actually.
There's this piddly little stand to the left of
it's
the away.
It's where all the private boxes, isn't it?
Yeah, and we were singing, you're waiting for the bus. It's brilliant.
I've never quite got that stand. I mean, obviously they're moving to a new ground relatively soon, I think. But it's Luton. There can't be that many people trying to get corporate boxes for you don't need a whole stand made of them.
Just a whole stand of corporate boxes. Yeah,
really odd.
Yeah, it was. So anyway, for me, that was my favourite Geoff Horsfield night, and those 2 goals have always been a couple of my favourites that he got. He's one of those players who, by the nature of his style, is extremely popular everywhere he's played. He left Fulham in 2000, having scored 31 goals in 74 games because really he didn't fit into Jean Tigana's style. And he signed for Birmingham City before his path eventually led him to West Brom, where he was a key part of the Baggies side in 2005, which became the first team bottom of the Premier League at Christmas to survive the drop. And of course, the Horse scored with his first touch of that game, having replaced the injured Jonathan Greening as West Brom went on to win 2-0 against Portsmouth. It's typical of the man, isn't it, that he'd be on the score sheet in a game of such magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, as I said about his Walsall goal, he'd come in with expectations. Well, no, actually, no, he didn't come in with expectations. He came in with almost something against him because of his style beforehand, and he just didn't give a shit. And in this case, he would have known the magnitude of the job, that they were coming up against, and I just, he would have just gone on and done the job. So he knew he had to score, and he did. And I think that that Portsmouth game, obviously, that was the last game of the season that kept them up, wasn't it? Mm. And
we did our bit by beating Norwich 6-0 that day.
Yeah, and I remember because I had a couple of housemates at uni. One was a Portsmouth fan, one was a West Brom fan. They were both up at the game. I was at the Fulham game. And we were messaging each other, and we were doing the job over Norwich, but because Portsmouth had to lose to send Southampton down, all these Portsmouth fans were buying West Brom shirts at the West Brom ground, and they were having a relegation party for Southampton. And I think when Geoff came on and scored, I think the Portsmouth fans cheered harder than the West Brom fans.
Yeah, and all their fans ended up on the pitch. Massive pitch invasion. He went down in West Brom folklore forever for that, didn't he? It's great, but
it's great, isn't it, for a player? But it's great for a player like that who is such a nice bloke and he's so down to earth. He is a good footballer. He doesn't strike you as sort of that naturally talented, naturally finesse, athletic footballer you get these days. But you give him the ball and you know exactly where it's going. He's not one of those that sort of tries to be too clever. He doesn't sort of miss easy goals or anything like that. He does the job that you need him to do. And I think that's why fans love him.
He's made a name for himself wherever he's been as well, albeit, whether it's straight away or whether it took a little bit of time. But I think most supporters of most clubs where he's played will have him down as like you say, a thoroughly nice bloke and a bit of a legend. And of course, now he's the founder of the Geoff Horsfield Foundation, of course, which focuses on homelessness and providing safe housing accommodation for vulnerable adults because he felt like he had a debt of gratitude to the local community in the Midlands, proving that he was not only a brilliant footballer, but a brilliant human being too.
Yeah, as I said, he just comes across as an incredibly nice guy, down to earth. Right? Obviously, he had his, he had his cancer scare as well, and he obviously came out the other end of that. And like for many people who do have something like that, it gives them a new lease of life. And he clearly felt that, he could use his position. It's not, a multi-millionaire footballer, but he probably did well, and he had the opportunity to do something good for the people in a city where he obviously spent a lot of his time. And I think it's it's definitely the mark of a man who's clearly knows how to make things better for people. So and just as you say, just a thoroughly nice bloke.
Yeah, nicely put. It always amazes me, actually, with Geoff Horsfield, because he was playing for Fulham when I was 17, it was a great time to be a 16, 17-year-old watching all of those promotions and being at that age as well, because you're just so into it at that age. Not that I'm not into it anymore, of course. I host a fucking podcast, for Christ's sake. But it's just a bit different when you're younger, because it just consumes your whole life when you don't necessarily have that much else going on. And I was going home and away, and I didn't miss a game for about 3 or 4 seasons during that time. But Geoff Horsfield was only at the club for a couple of seasons. He was there for that, obviously the promotion season under Keegan, and then that season under Paul Bracewell, when he did okay, but didn't set the Division 1 alight by any stretch of the imagination. But it always feels to me, when I look back and reminisce, that he was with the club a little bit longer, just because of how the impact that he had in that time.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? He came in, he made an impact, and then he left. And we're talking about him now, despite the fact he didn't complete 2 seasons with the club. And I think, you could look at a lot of players from that era as well and go, they made an impression on us, especially at our age. Obviously you're older than me, but
cheers for that.
Yeah. But they were the players that made an impression, because it was an era that was exciting. And whilst there may have been a relatively high turnover of them, the ones that came in, given the fact that we were one of the better teams in the league each time, in those seasons, they came in and, maybe sort of overstated it, set the world alight. But they did all make an impression. You wouldn't get that these days, because we're not, you have a player that comes in and plays a season and a half for us. We're kind of going to be bouncing between the leagues. And it's not quite the same feel, but then, at the same time, we're older, we do adult things, we don't have quite the same sort of youthful innocence that sort of got excited by that thing. So maybe it's different for, in 20 years' time, when Fulham Focus is still going strong and we have new hosts take over from us. Maybe they'll be talking about Cheehy or whatever his name was that played,
By which time we'll be far older and far more cynical,
far wiser, hosting sort of more serious podcasts about.
Maybe. Don't even speculate as to what they might be about. Christ. All right. Well, let's rate Geoff's Fulham career out of 10 then, as we always do.
I think I went. In our last chat, I went with 7.5 for Pesh, and I'm actually going to give him 7.5 as well, just because, as you say, he was only there for less than 2 seasons. He didn't set the world alight in the Championship or Division 1 or whatever it's called, but he just did everything, effectively. And I think maybe it was the style of Bracewell's football that probably stopped him from scoring more then. But given the fact he was there at such a short time, but made his mark, I will give him that 7.5.
Fair enough. I'm going to go a little bit higher. I'm going to go 8.5, just because I absolutely loved him, and he was unplayable at times in that Division 2 season. All right, he was only here a couple of years, but I think that was more to do with the direction that the club went in, rather than anything to do with him. I always remember Ian Brown saying about the Stone Roses, when they played a gig in a city, they'd just play one night rather than play a whole host of nights. They just want to get in there, make an impact, and get out again. And I feel like that's what Geoff Horsfield did at Fulham. He got in there, absolutely smashed it for a season, did okay in the second season, but then just got out. But my memories of him are just absolutely fantastic. I love him. So 8.5 for me. Lovely stuff, mate. All right, thanks for that. Let's pass back to the main show.
Fulham.
All right, well, we're going to come on to the stats, and seeing as we are graced by the presence of Mr. Statistician himself, Statto, we're going to hand over to Statto.
It makes sense, doesn't it? So I've got my little stat file here, and we start by looking at previous results against West Brom. So in total, throughout the whole of history, we've won 27 times against West Brom, but they've got 36 wins. However, recent history suggests that this game, it's going to be a dead rubber because the last 4 games we've played against West Brom have all been draws. That includes the 2 draws last season in the Championship, and also the 2 draws the last time we played them in the league, which was our relegation season back in 2014. During that season, we got I think they were just both 0-0s actually. There was no goal scores or anything. Our last home win against West Brom actually came back in September 2012, which was a 3-0 win. Goals from Berbatov and Sidwell. That was just a different time back then. It was a better time, let's be honest. And to be honest, they haven't won at home against us for a long time. They beat us in the League Cup back in 2005 at the Cottage. Junichi Inamoto scored in the 99th minute against us to knock us out. But in the league, they actually haven't beaten us at home since 1967. So that's either a good sign or a bad sign, depending how you look at it. Looking at the story of West Brom and how they've got here and what kind of their journey's been over the last couple of years, a couple of seasons ago. So obviously they got relegated back in 2017 and 18. They went through the torrid time going through 3 managers. They had Tony Pulis, who got sacked, and then they made the terrible choice of putting Alan Pardew in charge. And yeah, that didn't go too well for them. He was gone by April, and then Darren Moore took over, and he actually did really well in his last few games with them in the Prem. They won 3, they drew 2, and they lost 1, which was enough for him to become permanent manager. And then obviously he had a season in the Championship with them. You can kind of see the parallels here with him and Parker, which was a recurring theme last season, because obviously what happened with Darren Moore was that they got rid of him, despite the fact they were comfortably in the playoffs and still battling for automatic promotion, but they still went ahead and got rid of him, which, again, last year, that's what a lot of our fans were calling for with Parker, but we stayed put and we ended up going up, so that was all good. Ultimately, they fell short in that playoffs. They got knocked out by Villa on penalties, and over the summer, they decided to appoint Slaven Bilic, who, as we all know, he's a very experienced manager, did a good job at West Ham, did a great job with the Croatian national team, and he got them off to a great start in 2019-20. They didn't lose a game against game week 10, which was against Leeds, and that form continued through the first half of the season, and them and Leeds created a very sizable gap between all the other promotion chasing teams, including us and Brentford. For example, by the time we got around to January 2020, there was a 9-point gap between them and third place Brentford. However, they did start to wobble a bit after the restart, and they were picking up a lot of draws whilst other teams like us and Brentford were winning. And as we all know this anyway, by the final day, as Frenchy mentioned, we had an opportunity to get automatically promoted, as did Brentford. Both us and Brentford didn't get the results needed, so they just about got promoted. If we were to have a quick glance at those stats in that promotion year, they actually won more away games than they won home games, which is a bit concerning for the game on Monday. You don't normally get teams where away form is better than home form, but West Brom were one of them last season. They kept 9 clean sheets, and 7 of those also came in away games, so they're going to be a tough team to break down, and we saw that in the games we played against them last year. We only got a 1-1 draw at the Cottage and that dire 0-0 draw at the Hawthorns. And they've already kept 1 clean sheet in the Premier League this season, which, it's not great, 1 in 6 games, but hey, it's 1 more than what we have. On average, they scored 1.4 goals per away game and conceded 0.7. This record has obviously gone out the window so far this season in the Premier League, being a newly promoted team. where they've only scored 1 goal per away game and have conceded on average a massive 3.5 goals. So, for all what I'm talking about, that's going to be a boring 0-0 or boring draw. It could be some random high scoring game. And given how the Premier League's going this season, it could be one of those. And so far this season, in the 5 games that they've played, 67% of the goals that they have conceded have come in the second half, whereas 71% of the goals that they've scored have come in the first half. So it could very much be a case that we go 1-0 down in the first half, but if that's anything to go by, we can come back and we can get a few goals in the second half for them. So I've kind of merged the new signings that West Brom have made along with all their key players, because a lot of their signings were just the loans they had last year turned into permanents. Baldo, is there any player that you want to take a look at and kind of analyse?
Yeah, I think the main ones who's going to be their main sort of creative force and probably scoring force as well will be Matheus Pereira. It probably stands out as the obvious one, but I think it's probably the most obvious one to talk about. The Brazilian attacking midfielder was on loan at West Brom last season. So he was a permanent signing that they brought him from Sporting Lisbon. He's 24 years old and he got 8 goals and 16 assists last season in the Championship. No player in the league got more assists than him, and no other player made more key passes than him. So he's obviously going to be the creative force there. He's already got off to a very good start in the Premier League with 1 goal and 2 assists to his name this season. And that goal was an exceptional free kick in their 5-2 loss against Everton. And seeing as I know he's such a fan, I'm going to include this for our boy J-Mac, who's obviously listening in. Carlin Grant, who, for those who don't know, J-Mac was very, very much in favour of us signing him to be the backup to Alexander Mitrovic this season. So I figure we may as well give him a shout out. So he was their marquee signing this window. He was signed on the domestic deadline day in a reported £15 million move. He scored 19 goals and 4 assists last season for Huddersfield. The season before, he'd actually joined them when they were in the Premier League and only managed to score 4 goals. Will very much give them an attacking boost that they need, and he got his first goal on Monday against Brighton to score the equaliser for them. He can play centrally or wide on the left, but I think he's more likely going to be playing through the centre. So whoever our centre-back partner is, probably Tim Ream and Tosin, they're going to have a very hard job keeping him out of the limelight.
I think that would definitely be the case. Looking at their lineup against Brighton, they had Carlin Grant in the middle and Pereira and Diangana out wide with Krovinovic behind them. And just to kind of round out that attacking quadrant, Diangana, it was quite a weird one, really. He had a really good pre-season with West Ham, and he had a great year in the Championship last year with West Brom, scoring 8 goals and 6 assists. And you would have thought that if he was on loan at West Ham, if he was after having that good, successful loan stint at West Brom, West Ham would want to integrate him into their first team. But instead, they sold him for £15 million, I think it was, back to West Brom. And it was just a bit of a confusing one because he's already got 1 goal this season for Everton, and he's clearly a very talented player. And what makes it more weird is after selling Diangana, they then went and bought Benrahma, and it just a bit of a weird one from West Ham's perspective, but hey ho. And finally, Krovinovic, he joined quite later on in the window. They didn't get signed on a permanent. They had to re-sign him for another loan season from Benfica. Only managed 3 goals and 2 assists last year, but he was very key in a lot of the build-up to a lot of their goals last season. As mentioned, he's only just returned to the team, so he hasn't featured heavily so far, but did play in the Brighton game on Monday. Other key players, they have their captain, Jake Livermore, who's the experienced defensive midfielder. He'll be that defensive shield that we'll need to try and break down against West Brom. Did score a really bad own goal against Brighton, though. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It was just a bit of a defensive calamity. So at least we're not the only team that has a weird, dodgy defence. So that's a positive thing to look at come the game on Monday.
I love it. A positive thing to look at is that West Brom are shit at defending as well as us.
Yeah, we're not the only ones.
Yeah. Well, that's more than enough on West Brom. Thanks, Statto. Let's get the topic of conversation back onto Fulham. Baldo, you and the lads discussed this topic a little bit on the show earlier this week. But Statto, is there any way back for Scott Parker should we suffer defeat at home to West Brom on Monday, given the Khan's track record of a panic sacking in the Premier League?
Oh, the Khans do love a panic sacking, don't they? And I think after this game, there's an international break, which it always coincides well, and that's when the Khans like to make a change. I'm in the camp that we keep Parker until the end of the season, even if we get relegated. The last 2 seasons we spent in the Premier League, we've gone through 3 managers, and it's just ridiculous. It's stupid. Let's just have a seasonal consistency. Even if we do tragically awful, just keep him, and then maybe get rid in the summer if things don't work out. There's just no point changing manager now, because personally I think we're more or less down already, which is a very pessimistic outlook, but the stats are very much against us, so changing managers now is just a bit pointless. Obviously, if we lose against West Brom, it's going to make it very difficult for people like me to kind of justify keeping Parker in. And yeah, it feels like if we do lose, that could be curtains. It kind of feels like the Huddersfield game last time around with Slav, that we needed to win and didn't, which kind of more or less sealed his fate. And yeah, if we lose, then yeah, that could be the final nail in the coffin for Parker.
Yeah, it's a similar time of year to when Slav was sacked, actually, but obviously we're just a little bit earlier on in the season because of what happened. But you can never second guess the Khans, and will they think we need to go a little bit earlier this time because we'll have more of a chance of staying up, or will they just stick? And yeah, I hope they stick, but who knows what they're going to do? Just to pick you up, Statto, as well. It's not the international break after this game; it's after the West Ham game the following week.
Baldo, it's got an extra week before he gets fired.
I know, another week. Baldo, I think you spoke about that subject enough the other day, so I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Tony Khan himself surely has to wonder how much patience his dad's going to have with him if he continues to fail to deliver a squad worthy of competing in the Premier League. Do you ever see a day when Shahid may kick his own son out? He's a ruthless businessman after all, and if the manager's on borrowed time, then surely so should the director of football be after a catalogue of mistakes.
You'd like to think so, but there is just that little part of me that thinks, I think you've mentioned it a couple of times, they basically come as a package deal. And if we don't, we're going to have to, I don't want to say put up with, but I think that's probably the best way to word it. We're going to have to put up with Tony Khan for as long as Shahid Khan owns the club. And, if we're being honest, it could be a case of he expects us to go down or at this stage, and maybe he'll put faith in Tony Khan to get us back up again. To buy the players as he's proven that he can build a squad or recruit a squad for the championship. And then,
he can do that. He can do that, but he can't take it on to the next level so far, and he's had a couple of goes at it so far.
Yeah, so it is just a case of timing. Does he give him the January transfer window as one last chance? Because I do agree with you that I think there will come a point where Shahid realizes that his son's actions are effectively costing him. I don't know what the exact finances would be, but many millions of pounds / dollars to him. So there will come a time where he has to think, no, this just isn't working for me. Go make me money elsewhere. With AEW seems to be doing quite well at the moment. Go focus on making me money there rather than continually messing up here. I do think it's coming, but I just don't know when that time is going to be.
I think I agree with a lot of that, and I don't want to have to point fingers at Tony Khan or Scott Parker or anything, but I just kind of want to point a finger at the club in general. This is the second time we've been promoted, and both times what's happened is we've disregarded the squad that's got us promoted. First time around we kind of threw Stefan Johansson and McDonald and Bettany, we just threw them out straight away. This time around we seem to have done that with Hector and Rodak, and we just buy a brand new team and they all come together very late on, a bunch of strangers, and we just expect them to click and play as a team and get results. On paper, they're a very talented set of players, Loftus-Cheek, Tete. They're all great players, but they don't play together. There's no team. That team spirit gets ripped away after one season. And, you need to look at the club as a whole and look at kind of the strategy that they have going forward. If we want to be a club that wants to be a sustainable Premier League club, the answer is to not get promoted from the Championship with one team and then scrap that out, rip that out and start again from the other. And, there's no one individual that the blame falls on. You can blame Tony Khan for the transfers that we buy in. You can blame Scott Parker for the type of football you play. But overall, it's the club and the strategy going forward that we have that kind of needs to be more sustainable going forward, because what we have at the moment, it's clearly not working. We're on track to go down in an embarrassing fashion yet again, and something just needs to change.
Well, let's hope that we're jumping the gun a little bit here and that we're having this conversation and that things are going to change. Will it change on Monday night? Let's get your score predictions, lads. Baldo, I'll come to you first.
No, whether or not this is a result, it probably is a result of bad start to the season, but I'm just not feeling optimistic at all. Even though West Brom are, quote unquote, fellow strugglers, I just think that the morale at the club, you can tell just by the attitude of the players on the pitch. So unless something has drastically changed in training this week, I can't see that picking up. It is just a case of, whether or not West Brom are in the same boat as us. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, personally. I just can't see us winning.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that as well. I'm my confidence. I'm usually the most optimistic one, and I try and stay chipper and be optimistic when doing these podcasts. But having watched us in every game this season on the telly, I can't see us winning anything at the moment either, and I just have no confidence in our defence and no confidence in the attack breaking West Brom down. So I'm going to be optimistic and say we're going to get a point. And yeah, I'll go with 1-1 as well and keep my fingers crossed. Statto, how about you?
Oh, I really want to be the positive one here, but I'm kind of the same. Like, the best I can see is us getting a point. And I think, to be honest, this could be the first 0-0 we get at the Cottage since 2012, I think it was. So I think
clean
that's
sheet.
maybe the
There's
case.
your positivity.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get a clean sheet, but I can't see us scoring unless Lookman does something special. But at this point, you'd imagine that West Brom have probably seen all of the games that we've played so far, and they're probably just pegged Lookman as our main man, and they're probably going to man mark him out of the game. So 0-0 is optimistic at best for me, I think.
All right, mate. Well, lads, thanks for joining me for this one, and thanks to you all for listening at home. J-Mac will be back on Tuesday to talk all about the game, and he'll be joined by Don Love and Matt Dom, so be sure to tune in for that. Have a great weekend in the meantime, and chat to you next week. Cheers.
Fulham.